I'm 22, and I thought I knew everything about my mom. She raised me on her own. No dad in the picture, barely any extended family, and definitely no siblings. Growing up, it was just me and her, and while we didn't have much, we were close. I was her everything, or so she said. She used to work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. Never complained, always smiling, always strong. But when she died suddenly 2 months ago from a brain aneurysm, everything I thought I knew about her started to fall apart, starting with who showed up at her funeral. The service was quiet, small, just a handful of coworkers, neighbors, my college friends, and my mom's best friend Clara. Clara helped organize everything and stayed by my side the whole time. But then, right as the service was starting, this man walked in with 2 teenagers. He looked about 40, sharp suit, expensive watch. The teens looked like they didn't want to be there, both holding their phones and keeping their eyes down. I didn't recognize them, but I thought maybe they were friends of Clara's, or old coworkers I hadn't met. Then Clara froze. Like, full-on froze. Her face went pale, and her hand gripped my arm so tight. I asked if she was okay, and all she said was, I didn't think that was my friend. But what really got me, the man didn't sit in the back. He walked straight to the front row, the seat next to mine. This soft, he said, You must be Ava. I'm so sorry for you. Stunned. I didn't know who he was. He clearly knew who I was. And then he said, It's very close to you. The way he said it, it made my because I recognized his face. Not from real life, from a photograph. A photograph I was never I found that photo when I was 16. I'd been snooping, not for anything big, just looking for extra cash or old birthday. My mom had this little drawer in her bedroom dresser that was always locked. One day while she was out, I found the key taped to the underside of the drawer. Curiosity won. Inside there were only a few things. A crumpled letter, an old bracelet I'd never seen her wear, and the photo. It was her, smiling, maybe early 30s, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. He had his arm around her, hand on her waist, and they looked like a couple. They were standing in front of a car, with out-of-state plates. What stood out the most, though, was the baby stroller beside them. I remember holding the photo and feeling this weird chill. I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't feel like something I was supposed to see. When I asked her later if she'd ever dated someone after I was born, she gave me this awkward smile and said, No one worth remembering. That was it. I never brought it up again, and I never told her I'd opened the drawer. But now, here I was, 6 years later, sitting at her funeral next to that man from the photo. He didn't say much during the service, just sat there with his head down, occasionally glancing at me. The teens, his kids, I assumed, looked bored and confused. Afterward, when people started leaving, he stayed behind. Clara was clearly trying to avoid him. She kept pulling me aside, asking if I was okay, trying to rush me out. But I couldn't leave, not until I knew who he was. He finally approached me as I stood by the casket one last time. I'm sorry, he said again. I didn't want to make this harder for you. I had to be here. I asked him the only question that made sense. Who are you? He hesitated. Then, with a heavy breath, he said it. I was your mom's husband. Pause. She was my wife. And in that moment, I swear, the ground shifted under me. Because my mother was never married. At least that's what she always told me. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I just stood there, staring at him while my brain tried to piece together something. Anything that made this make sense. My mom's husband? What was he talking about? He must have seen the disbelief on my face because he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, creased, like he'd been holding onto it for years. Without saying a word, he handed it to me and stepped back. It was a copy of a marriage certificate. Her name. His name. The date? 1999. I was born in 2002. I remember the paper shaking in my hands as I read it. My mom got married 3 years before I was born? That didn't make sense. She never mentioned a husband. She never even mentioned dating seriously. She always told me she raised me alone, that my father wasn't in the picture, that she didn't need a man, that we were stronger as a pair, just the 2 of us. That had been the entire foundation of my childhood. I looked up at him, and he was watching me with this quiet sadness, like he already knew how much this was breaking me. He opened his mouth to say something, but I wasn't ready. I turned and walked away. I didn't even say goodbye. I just left the funeral home, walked out into the parking lot, and sat in my car with the paper in my lap, trying not to hyperventilate. My hands were still trembling when Clara came out a few minutes later. She didn't say anything right away, just got in the passenger seat and sat with me in silence. When she finally did speak, her voice was soft, almost apologetic. You weren't supposed to find out like that. It felt like a slap. I turned to her so fast I nearly knocked my head against the window. You knew? I asked. She didn't deny it. I promised your mom I'd never say anything unless she did first. But I guess now that she's gone, it doesn't matter anymore. It did matter. It mattered a lot. I was 22 years old, and apparently my mother had been married. She had a whole secret life I knew nothing about. A husband. A man who showed up to her funeral claiming a past she never once shared with me, and somehow Clara, her best friend, had known the whole time? I demanded answers, right then and there, and what Clara told me next made my stomach twist in ways I can't even explain. She said my mom had 2 lives, 2 homes, 2 identities, one as mom to me, and another as wife to him. They had stayed married for years, even after I was born, even after we moved states, even after she told me it was just the 2 of us. And if what Clara said was true, that man from the funeral, he wasn't just her husband, he was my father. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat on Clara's guest bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process how my entire life had just been rewritten in the span of an afternoon. I was supposed to be grieving my mom, but instead I was unraveling a story she never told me. A double life she hid so well, I never even had a clue. She lied to me for 22 years, and what hurt the most was how easily it had all started to slip into place the more I thought about it. The late nights she said she was working overtime when I was little. The weekends she told me she was visiting an old friend. The fact that me come with her on certain trips, always saying they were too boring, or she'd be too busy to take care of me properly. Back then, I never questioned it. She was always back within a day or two, hugs and souvenirs like any loving. But now, I couldn't stop wondering, where had she really been, and who had she been with? I barely got 2 hours of sleep before I was up again, eyes puffy, head pounding. I knew I couldn't sit still. I needed answers. I needed him. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called the number he'd written on the back of that marriage certificate. He answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he'd been waiting for this. We met later that day at a quiet coffee shop across town. I watched him walk in, buttoned up, polished, carrying himself like a man who had nothing to hide. It pissed me off, honestly. Like he wasn't sitting on 22 years of secrets. Like he hadn't just torn a hole in my reality. He sat across from me. I didn't offer a handshake, didn't even say hello. I just asked the question that had been tormenting me since the funeral. Are you really my father? He nodded, slowly, no hesitation. Yes, he said. I am. The words didn't even feel real. They just sat in the air like smoke, thin and impossible to grasp. I kept waiting for him to explain why she lied, how he could let her take me away, why neither of them thought I deserved the truth. And then he dropped another bomb. I wanted to be in your life. I tried, but she made me promise to stay away. I blinked. That made even less sense. My mom was fiercely protective, yes, but she wasn't cruel. Not to me, at least. She said it would be easier, he continued. She didn't want you growing up in a divided home. She thought, if she raised you on her own, you'd have stability. No drama. Just love. I stared at him, trying to read his face. But he looked genuine, like he really believed that story. Like she really made him stay away. But if that were true, why keep the marriage? Why pretend to be single? Why create 2 entirely separate worlds? I asked him what their relationship had been like when I was born. That's when things got even weirder. He said they stayed married, but lived separately, saw each other a few times a month. An arrangement, he called it. Apparently my mom never wanted a divorce. She just wanted distance, control, and somehow he agreed to all of it. I asked him if the kids at the funeral were mine too, my siblings. He shook his head. No, they're from my current marriage. After your mom, I moved on. So, let me get this straight. He was married to my mom, while having another family? He must have seen the horror on my face because he quickly clarified. We separated years ago. It just wasn't official. She refused to sign the papers. Said she didn't need a piece of paper to change the truth. But the truth was, I didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything felt like lies. Like no one was telling the full story. And the worst part? I had a creeping suspicion that someone else knew more than they were letting on. Because when I got home that night, Clara was waiting for me, and she had something in her hands. A box. One she said my mom made her promise to give me, only after she died. The box was small, heavy, worn at the corners like it had been moved around and hidden more than once. Clara held it out to me like it was radioactive. She gave this to me 6 years ago, she said. Told me not to open it, not to read it, just to keep it safe. She paused, then added, and to give it to you after she was gone. I didn't say anything. My fingers closed around it automatically. My chest felt tight. The idea that my mom had prepared something like this, something secret, something timed, sent a cold shiver down my spine. What else had she been keeping from me? How many versions of her life had she curated? Clara didn't stay. She just squeezed my arm gently and said, "Be careful. It's a lot." Then she left. I sat there for an hour before I opened it. The box wasn't full of documents or photos like I expected. Inside, there were 3 things. 1. A stack of handwritten letters tied with red thread. 2. A small flash drive. 3. And a photo album labeled in her handwriting, Summer House 2004, 2007. The letters were addressed to me, all of them, each one dated, each one sealed in its own envelope. The first was marked, "Read this one first." So I did. My hands shook as I tore it open. "Ava, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I'm sorry. For everything. I don't know how much you've discovered already, or what you've been told, but I need you to hear this from me. Not from Clara. Not from him. From your mother. Yes, I was married. Yes, I had a life you didn't know about. But I need you to understand something. Everything I did to protect you. I didn't keep things from you because I didn't love you. I did it because I loved you too much. You were born into a mess. I was 29 when I found out I was pregnant with you. Your father and I were already on the rocks by then, even though we were still legally married. I thought having a child would fix things. I was wrong. He was charming, on the surface, but he wasn't the man I thought he was. And by the time you were 6 months old, I realized I couldn't raise you in that environment. He didn't hurt us physically, but emotionally, he had this way of making me feel small, like I couldn't breathe unless he allowed it. He didn't want to be a father, not really. He loved the idea of a family, but not the work, not the sacrifices. He wanted control, and when he didn't get it, he pulled away. So I left. I didn't tell anyone at first. I just packed up and disappeared. I moved us across state lines, changed our last name, and made it look like I'd never been married. I know that sounds extreme, but Ava, I couldn't risk him taking you from me. He threatened it once. Said if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I never saw you again. That was the moment I knew I had to vanish. I stayed legally married because it bought me time, distance. But emotionally, I was already gone. I built a new life for us, one where you were safe, one where you could grow up without fear. But I always knew the truth would find you someday. If that time has come, I'm so sorry I'm not there to walk you through it. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I was scared. Scared you'd hate me. Scared you'd go looking for him and believe the version of events he'd spin for you. He wasn't there for your first words. He wasn't there when you had chicken pox, when you lost your first tooth, or when you cried yourself to sleep after your first heartbreak. He didn't raise you. I did. And if nothing else, I hope you remember that. Everything else is in the letters. I love you, Ava. Always. Mom, I don't know how long I sat there after finishing it. My heart felt like it had collapsed in on itself. She'd told me so many things over the years, some of them true, others carefully rewritten. But this letter was raw, unfiltered. It didn't justify the lies. But for the first time, I could feel the fear behind them, and I believed her, at least, most of her. But one line wouldn't stop replaying in my head. He wasn't the man I thought he was, because the man I'd met at the funeral, the one claiming to be my father, had seemed calm, respectful, careful, too careful, curated. And suddenly I started to wonder, what if he wasn't telling the truth either? What if he came to the funeral not just to mourn her, but to find me? The more I read her words, the more questions I had. My mom had always been a planner, organized to a fault, every moment of our lives scheduled and accounted for. But I never realized she'd been orchestrating a parallel life behind the curtain. I spent the rest of that night combing through the contents of the box. The letters were all in order, labeled with years, 2002, 2003, 2004, up to 2020. She hadn't written one every year, just in the years something major had happened, judging by the subject lines scribbled on the back of each envelope. Your first day of school, the day you asked about your dad, when I almost told you, and the one that stopped me cold, the summer house. That matched the album in the box. Summer House 2004-2007. I opened the album carefully, photos of me as a toddler, playing by a lake, my mom smiling on the porch of a small cabin. The same man from the funeral, my father, standing next to her in some of the pictures, one hand on her shoulder, one hand holding mine. A few of the photos looked like they were taken by someone else, maybe Clara. The rest were clearly selfies, the kind you take when you're trying to capture a moment you know won't last. What hit me the hardest? I didn't remember any of it. My brain should have stored at least flashes of those summers. Sand between my toes, the sound of frogs at night, my mom brushing the knots out of my hair while we watched the sunset. But it was all blank, like my memory had hit delete on that entire chapter. I called Clara again the next morning. She didn't answer but texted back, "I figured you'd call. I'm free tonight. Come over when you're ready." I spent the day flipping through more letters, trying to absorb the story she had hidden away in ink. She painted a very different picture of my father. He wasn't abusive in the way most people expect. No bruises, no shouting. The emotional weight of that was constant. She described how he'd isolate her from friends, control finances, decide where they lived, who they spoke to, even what she wore. She called it quiet domination, like he was always shaping her life, molding her until she didn't recognize herself. And when she finally found the strength to leave, she wrote that he promised her peace in exchange for silence. She'd take me, vanish in return. He'd move on. As long as she never reached out, Never contacted his family, never told me the truth. It was supposed to be the clean break but clearly it hadn't been. By the time I got to Clara's house that evening, I had a notepad full of questions, but before I could open my mouth, she handed me a mug of tea and said, "I have something, but it stays between us." She pulled a laptop from a drawer, an encrypted folder on the desktop. Then she clicked a file named Audio 2018. It was a voicemail from him. I recognized the voice immediately. "Hey, it's me. I saw the photos from Ava's school fundraiser. She's getting big. You said you'd keep her away from that town. You said you'd keep your distance." He sighed into the phone. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We had a deal. You keep pretending we don't exist, and I stay out of your life. But I swear, if I see another post, another photo, another clue, I'll come find her myself." Click. I sat there, frozen. This was from 2018. I would have been 15. That was the year Mom took me off social media. She'd told me it was because of online safety, because too many creeps were out there. I believed her, deleted everything, never questioned it again. But now I understood. She wasn't afraid of creeps. She was afraid of him. Clara sat across from me, watching my reaction. She didn't say a word. My chest felt like it was caving in. I'd met this man. I'd hugged him at my mom's funeral. I'd believed him when he said he wanted to be part of my life. But that voice, the calmness laced with quiet threat, shattered any illusion I had left. And suddenly, the pieces clicked. He hadn't come to the funeral for closure. He'd come because she was finally gone, and I was no longer protected. I was finally within reach. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Clara offered to let me stay over, and I took her up on it, curling up on the couch with my mind spinning in 100 directions. I tried reading more letters, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My mom's voice, her handwriting, it all felt like whispers from a grave I wasn't ready to visit. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me at the funeral. Not warm, not fatherly, curious, calculated, like someone sizing up a long-lost asset. I'd assumed he wanted maybe guilt brought him to the funeral. Maybe he'd grown, matured, regretted everything. But that voicemail? That wasn't a man seeking redemption. That was a man losing control of something he thought he'd buried. And now that Mom was gone, he saw a chance to reclaim it. Me. The next morning I went back to my apartment. There were 3 missed calls from an unknown number, and a voicemail. His voice again. "Ava, I hope you're okay. I know this is a lot, and you probably don't trust me right now, but I want to fix that. I want to make up for lost time. You deserve to know where you come from, who you really are." Then this part. "I think we should meet again. Just the 2 of us. No distractions." I deleted the message before it finished, but it was too late. That afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I peeked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. It was him. Again. No call, no warning. Just there, like he had every right. I didn't open the door. I watched in silence as he stood there for a minute, maybe 2, then slipped an envelope under the door and left. Inside? A letter. Typed. Formal. Like he was writing to a stranger. "Ava, I understand your hesitation. I know your mother kept us apart for a long time, and I won't pretend that didn't hurt me. I respected her wishes for as long as I could. But now that she's gone, I believe it's time we reconnect. You deserve answers, and I deserve a chance to give them. Please consider meeting me one more time. I'll be at the old pier on Hawthorne Lake next Saturday at 4 p.m. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation. Your father, Michael." The way he signed it made my skin crawl. Your father. It felt wrong, like a title he hadn't earned, like he was trying to claim something sacred just because she wasn't alive to stop him. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't want to see him, but part of me was curious. Not because I missed him, I never knew him, but because my mom's letters only told her side of the story. And there was this small, intrusive voice in my head whispering, "What if she was lying too? What if there's something else you don't know?" I brought the letter to Clara. She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't get angry. She didn't even tell me not to go. Instead, she said, "If you're going, you're not going alone." Then she reached into a drawer, pulled out a small black device, and handed it to me. A voice recorder. She looked me in the eye and said, "Whatever happens at that pier, I want you to remember it all." Saturday came too fast. All week I'd gone back and forth. Should I meet him? Should I ignore him? Should I go just to slam the door in his face one last time? But deep down, I knew I was going. Not because I wanted closure. Not even because I wanted answers. I was going because I needed to see what he would do when he thought he finally had the upper hand. I wore simple clothes, no makeup, just jeans, a hoodie, and the recorder Clara had given me tucked inside my jacket pocket. It was already running before I even got in my car. The pier at Hawthorne Lake was deserted, windy, the kind of gray late afternoon where everything feels colder than it is. I recognized the place from the photo album. My mom had taken me there as a toddler. That dock, those trees, the wooden railing chipped with age. We'd stood in that exact spot before, but back then I hadn't known I was living in a secret. I parked far away and walked up slowly, heart thudding. He was already there, sitting on a bench at the edge of the dock, staring out at the water like he was rehearsing something. When he heard my footsteps, he turned and smiled like we were old friends catching up. That smile alone made my skin crawl. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then he started talking. He said all the right things. He missed me. He thought about me every year on my birthday. He never stopped loving my mom. He only agreed to stay away because she threatened to file for full custody and cut him out completely. He didn't want to traumatize me. Lie after carefully measured lie. I didn't say a word, just nodded occasionally, watching his eyes for any sign of who he really was underneath the mask. Then he dropped the real reason he'd asked to meet. He wanted access to my mom's estate. Said he believed there might be assets tied to their still valid marriage, pensions, insurance, things she might have overlooked. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather, like my mom's death was a technicality in a financial plan he hadn't quite finished. I asked him flat out, "Is that what this is really about?" He hesitated, just for a second. Then he recovered. "No," he said. "Of course not, but, I mean, if something was legally mine, wouldn't it make sense to claim it?" There it was, the truth bleeding through the charm. This wasn't about rebuilding a relationship. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted leverage. He wanted something from her. And now that she couldn't stop him, he thought I'd be an easy target. But the best part? He didn't know I had the letters. He didn't know I had his voicemail. And he definitely didn't know I'd been recording every word of this little reunion from the moment I stepped onto the dock. So I smiled, and I said, "You're right. It does make sense." Then I stood up, thanked him for his time, walked away, leaving him there on the bench, confused. He couldn't decide if he'd just won or lost. What he didn't see was me, 10 minutes later, in my car, sending the recording straight to, along with a message. He thinks he's still in control. Let's remind him he never was. The moment I sent Clara that recording, something shifted in me, like the fog that had been wrapped around my head for the last 2 weeks had finally started to. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like a scared daughter stumbling through secrets. I felt like a woman taking back control of her own story. Clara responded almost immediately. "Good, let's get to work." What followed was a flurry of quiet planning. She called in favors, dug through old files, looped in a friend of hers who worked at a local legal office. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing to Michael. I wanted him to believe I was still processing, that maybe I was naive enough to think he meant well. But behind the scenes, I was digging deep. With Clara's help, I went to the courthouse and requested a full marriage record. The kicker? My mom had never finalized the divorce. They were technically still married, which explained why he was now sniffing around her estate like a bloodhound. But here's the twist he didn't see coming. In 2019, just a year before she died, my mom had updated her will. Everything she owned, savings, personal items, even the small life insurance policy, was legally designated to me. She even had a clause in place to protect it from outside claims, naming him specifically as someone who was to receive nothing. Her lawyer had made her write a notarized statement explaining her reasoning, and it was brutal. She called him manipulative, controlling, a man who used silence like a weapon. She wrote that he had threatened to take me from her more than once, and that keeping me away from him wasn't just a choice. It was the only way she could guarantee I'd grow up free from fear. That letter made me cry, not just because it confirmed everything I suspected, but because even in death, she was still trying to protect me. We filed everything, backed it up, secured it. Then I went quiet again, for days, until Michael broke the silence himself. He showed up at my apartment, not at the door this time, just waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car like he'd been standing there too long. I didn't approach him. I called Clara, who was waiting nearby with her lawyer friend. They pulled up, parked right behind him, and handed him a manila envelope. Inside, a copy of my mom's will, a transcript of the recorded conversation at the pier, a cease and desist order, already prepared in case he tried to make any legal claims, and a simple note written in my handwriting that said, "If you push this, you will lose everything, including whatever image you think you have left of yourself." He didn't look up, didn't speak, just took the envelope, climbed into his car, and drove away. That was 5 days ago, and I haven't heard from him since. But yesterday morning, Clara sent me a text. It was a screenshot of a post from a small community group in his hometown. Apparently, he and his wife, his current wife, had separated. The caption? "Never thought he'd get caught. But here we are." Turns out he'd been lying to them too. About his past, about my mom, about me. And suddenly, I realized something I never expected. I wasn't the only person he'd built a false reality around. I was just the one who finally refused to play along. I wish I could say that after everything, I felt victorious. That bringing the truth to light and shutting him down brought me peace. But grief doesn't work that way. It's not clean. It doesn't tie itself up in a bow just because the bad guy loses. I still cry some nights. I still miss her voice. And I still hate that my last conversation with my mother was about laundry. But now I understand why she carried all that weight alone, why she chose silence instead of confession. She wasn't weak. She wasn't hiding out of shame. She was protecting me from a man who had tried to control her, and who would have done the same to me if he had the chance. She gave me a life free of his reach, and even in her absence she gave me the tools to defend it. The last letter in her box didn't have a date, no subject line, just 3 words on the envelope. If you're ready. I read it this morning. Ava, you're stronger than you know, and if you're holding this, I believe you finally understand why I did what I did. I was never perfect. I lied. I ran. I pretended for too long. But if there's one thing I hope you carry forward, it's this. Never let someone else write your story for you. People like him, they survive by bending the truth, by making others question their own reality. But you are your mother's daughter. You see through shadows. You found your way to the truth, and now I hope you find your way to freedom. You don't owe anyone your forgiveness, not even me. But if you can forgive yourself for not knowing sooner, for not asking harder, for still loving me despite it all, I think you'll find that peace is waiting for you. With all my love, Mom. I sat there for a long time after reading that. Then I took the letters, the album, the recording, and everything else I'd collected, and packed it away. Not because I want to forget, but because I finally feel like I can move forward without needing to prove anything anymore. My mother's secrets hurt, but her love never wavered. I didn't just lose her at that funeral. I found out who she truly was, and in the end, that's what saved me. Not the letters, not the evidence, not even the truth. It was the love behind the lie, and I think in some strange, twisted, beautiful way, that's what makes me whole again.